desire is destroying you, here's Buddha's brutal answer. Let me ask you something that might sting. What if everything you're chasing, success, love, happiness, and wealth, is actually the very thing keeping you trapped? What if the reason you feel anxious, restless, or unfulfilled isn't because you don't have enough, but because you want too much? And what if the real enemy isn't failure, poverty, or loneliness, but desire itself? That's not a message we hear often in today's world. In fact, it sounds almost insane. We live in a culture that worships desire. We're told to dream bigger, hustle harder, visualize more, climb higher. But underneath all that is a paradox so brutal it cuts through every illusion we hold. The more you want, the more you suffer. This is what the Buddha saw over 2,500 years ago. And to be clear, he wasn't just sitting under a tree meditating his way into some mystical detachment. He had lived both extremes. He was a prince who had everything: wealth, pleasure, status. Then he became an ascetic who almost starved himself to death in pursuit of spiritual mastery. And in both lives, abundance and absence, he realized the same thing: desire, whether fulfilled or denied, leads to suffering. Not because the world is cruel, but because desire is a fire that never stops burning. You feed it, it grows hotter. You starve it, it consumes you. And most of us are caught in that fire without even realizing it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about it. When was the last time you truly felt satisfied, not just momentarily pleased, but deeply content? Do you even remember? Or has your life become a series of cravings disguised as goals? We think, once I get that promotion, then I'll feel secure. Or, once they love me back, then I'll feel worthy. But the moment you get it, the desire mutates. It shifts. It evolves. Now you want the next thing, the better thing, the thing someone else already has. And you don't even notice that you become a slave to an invisible master, your own mind, constantly whispering, more. Buddha didn't say desire is bad because he was anti-pleasure. He wasn't trying to ruin the party. He just saw what desire really is: a trap, a psychological loop that keeps you from ever arriving. And he wasn't offering a religious doctrine, he was making an observation. A deeply logical, almost mathematical conclusion about the nature of human experience. What he called the first noble truth is this: life is suffering. Not all the time, not in every breath, but as a general condition of existence, suffering is inevitable. Why? Because of the second noble truth: suffering comes from craving. And here's the catch: craving isn't just about wanting things you don't have. It's also about clinging to things you do. We don't just suffer when we want more. We suffer when we're afraid to lose what we've got. That new car you love, now you're afraid someone will scratch it. That relationship you finally got, now you're anxious about it ending. Even pleasure becomes a kind of torment, because in the back of our minds, we know it won't last. We fear its loss even while we enjoy it. So we're caught in this constant tension, wanting, fearing, needing, protecting. And we call that living. But what if there's another way? What if the answer isn't in getting more, but in wanting less? What if peace isn't something you achieve, but something you uncover by letting go? That's where Buddha's brutal answer comes in, not brutal because it's cruel, but because it demands everything from you. It asks you to stop blaming the world, your parents, your boss, or your ex. It asks you to turn inward and realize the suffering is coming from you. Not because you're flawed, but because your mind is constantly reaching. You're never fully here, never fully now. You're always leaning into a future that doesn't exist or clinging to a past that's already gone. And here's the twist that most people don't see. When you stop chasing, when you stop craving, when you stop needing the moment to be different, you finally feel free. Not because the world changes, but because your relationship to it does. You stop being a prisoner of desire. And in that stillness, in that surrender, you begin to experience something radically unfamiliar: contentment. Not the fake kind that comes from a dopamine hit, but the deep kind that comes from no longer needing reality to match your expectations. So now I'll leave you with the question, what are you desiring right now? And is it making you free, or is it making you a slave? The addiction to becoming. Why chasing better is making you worse? Let's get brutally honest. Almost everything we do is driven by the belief that who we are right now isn't enough. We wake up already behind. We measure ourselves against the future: who we should be, who we could be, who we must become. I'll be happy when I lose the weight. I'll be confident once I get that job. I'll finally feel whole when I meet the right person. But what if I told you this constant hunger to become something else isn't growth? What if it's the very thing that's breaking you? You see, we've confused ambition with salvation. Self-improvement has become a religion, and the altar we worship at is the better version of me. But here's the problem: when you believe you're not enough yet, when you see your current self as a project to fix rather than a person to understand, you become addicted to becoming. You're always chasing a different version of yourself, and in doing so, you're constantly rejecting the one who's here now. And that rejection, that subtle, daily violence you commit against your present self, builds shame. It builds anxiety. It builds a permanent sense of not quite there yet. And that's the tragedy, because the finish line keeps moving. Buddha saw this with piercing clarity. He understood that the desire to become anything at all, even spiritually awakened, is still desire. And desire is suffering. Let that sink in. Even the desire to be moral, enlightened, wise, or peaceful traps you in a cycle of dissatisfaction. Because as long as you believe you need to become something, you are denying the possibility that you are already whole. And that denial, however subtle, creates a war inside you. A war between who you are and who you think you should be. And what does war create? Pain, division, exhaustion. Look at your life for a moment. How many of your daily actions are fueled by this belief that you're not enough as you are? How many of your anxieties are rooted in the illusion that you're falling short of some imaginary ideal? How much of your energy is being spent on trying to fix yourself instead of meet yourself? We call it progress. We call it motivation. But at its core, it's often self-rejection dressed in productivity. Now, don't get me wrong. Growth is beautiful. Change is necessary. But there's a difference between growing out of love for yourself and growing out of hatred for who you are. The first is natural, it flows. The second is toxic, it corrodes. And our culture perpetuates the second. We're bombarded with images of perfection. Every scroll on social media is a reminder that someone else is thinner, happier, richer, more successful. And so we internalize this belief: if I could just be more like them, then I'd be okay. That's the addiction to becoming, and it's a trap. So what's Buddha's answer? He didn't tell you to stop evolving, but he did tell you to stop clinging. Stop clinging to the idea that you'll be happy once you arrive at some future version of yourself. Because here's the truth, you never arrive. You just move the goalpost. And every time you do, you reinforce the lie that your current self isn't worthy of love. But what if you stopped? What if, just for a moment, you allowed yourself to believe that nothing is missing? That who you are right now, flawed, confused, growing, is enough. That belief alone could rewrite your entire life. Here's a radical thought. Maybe your greatest transformation begins not when you become someone new, but when you finally accept the one you are. Maybe peace doesn't come from reaching a higher state, but from letting go of the belief that you need one. And maybe the real spiritual path isn't upward, it's inward, into the raw, unfiltered truth of your present experience, into the parts of you you've been trying to abandon by becoming something else. So I'll ask you this: what are you becoming right now? And more importantly, what part of yourself are you abandoning to get there? The tyranny of pleasure, how desire hijacks your mind, your time, and your soul. We live in an era where pleasure is king. It's everywhere, all the time, and it's never more than a few taps away. Food, entertainment, validation, dopamine, instant, seductive, and endless. We're not just surrounded by pleasure, we're drowning in it. And yet, somehow we're more anxious, more distracted, and more lost than ever. Why? Because the pursuit of pleasure doesn't free us, it enslaves us. It hijacks our attention, distorts our values, and quietly consumes the most sacred parts of our lives. And the worst part, we think it's normal. Buddha understood something we've forgotten. Pleasure is not the same as peace. One is a fleeting sensation, the other is a state of being. But we've been conditioned to confuse the two. We chase pleasure thinking it will bring us peace, but the more we chase, the more restless we become. Because pleasure, by its nature, is temporary. It rises, it peaks, and then it fades. And the moment it fades, we feel the emptiness return. So we chase again, another hit, another scroll, another distraction. This is the cycle. And it's not just unhealthy, it's soul eroding. Think about how much time you've spent in pursuit of pleasure and how rarely it's delivered anything lasting. Those late nights binge watching shows you don't even care about. The food you eat not because you're hungry, but because you're bored or lonely. The endless scrolling through curated lives that make you feel like yours is missing something. These aren't just bad habits, they're symptoms of a deeper hunger that pleasure was never designed to satisfy. And yet, we keep feeding the hunger with the wrong food. Here's the brutal truth: pleasure is addictive because it promises relief but delivers dependence. It gives us a momentary escape from discomfort, emotional, physical, existential, but it never solves the root of that discomfort. It just numbs it, and over time, our tolerance increases. What once satisfied us now barely registers, so we need more, and more, and more. Until eventually, we're not seeking pleasure for joy, we're seeking it to avoid pain, to avoid silence, to avoid ourselves. Buddha called this the craving mind, a mind that's never still, never content, always reaching, always grasping. And the more we feed it, the louder it gets. It's not just about craving things, it's about craving relief from being ourselves. That's the real tyranny of pleasure. It doesn't just waste your time, it erodes your relationship with presence. It teaches you to turn away from discomfort instead of facing it. And in doing so, It robs you of your greatest teacher, your own suffering. Because yes, suffering teaches, discomfort reveals. That gnawing feeling of emptiness you try to cover with distraction, that's your soul telling you something's off. It's that your life is out of alignment, that you're living on the surface of things and avoiding the depth. But you can't hear that message if you're always plugged in, always stimulated, always running from stillness. And that's exactly what this pleasure-obsessed culture encourages, a life of constant stimulation and zero introspection. So what's the alternative? It's not about rejecting all pleasure. It's about reclaiming your mind. It's about noticing when pleasure becomes a way to escape rather than a way to enjoy. It's about sitting in discomfort long enough to hear what it's trying to say. Because when you stop running, when you stop numbing, something extraordinary happens. The mind begins to settle. The fog begins to clear. And you begin to see not just the madness of your cravings, but the peace that's been buried beneath them all along. So here's the question: what pleasure are you using to avoid your pain? And what would happen if, just once, you chose to feel instead of flee? Freedom by fire, why letting go of desire is the most liberating act of all. Let's be honest, letting go of desire sounds terrifying. To most of us, desire feels like life itself. It fuels our dreams, our goals, our relationships, even our sense of identity. We say, without desire, what's the point? But that's the illusion. That's the fire we're trapped in, burning endlessly for things that never satisfy. Buddha didn't say this to be poetic. He said it because he had seen the truth. Desire is a fire, and we are the ones feeding it. Every craving, every attachment, every imagined future we cling to is another piece of wood thrown into the flames. And freedom begins when you stop feeding the fire. This is not about becoming numb or indifferent. It's not about giving up on life. It's about seeing clearly what actually causes your suffering and making the radical choice to stop holding on. Letting go of desire doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. You stop needing things to go your way in order to feel okay. You stop defining yourself by what you lack. You stop chasing moments, people, achievements, and pleasures as if they are the cure for your inner discomfort. And when that clinging ends, something incredible happens. Peace arises not as a reward, but as what was always there underneath the noise. Think about how much of your energy is spent trying to control things. Your image, your future, your relationships, your outcomes. All of it driven by the belief that something is missing. That if you could just get one more thing, more money, more love, more respect, then you'd finally be whole. But what if you're not missing anything? What if the sense of lack is an illusion created by the craving mind? And what if the only thing actually missing is your presence, your ability to be fully here, right now, without needing anything to change? That's what makes letting go so powerful. It's not passive. It's not weakness. It's an act of fire. It burns through the illusions. It strips you of the false self that is constantly reaching, constantly needing. But it feels like death at first, the death of who you thought you were. But it's also a birth. The birth of stillness. The birth of clarity. The birth of a kind of freedom that can't be bought, earned, or chased. A freedom that exists only when the chase ends. And here's the paradox. When you stop needing life to give you something, life opens up. You begin to receive rather than grasp. You begin to act without attachment, love without possession, serve without expectation. You begin to live from a place of fullness rather than lack. And that is where real power lies. Not in controlling the world, but in no longer being controlled by your cravings. So ask yourself, what are you still holding on to? What outcomes are you still obsessed with? What identities are you still defending? What would happen if you let them go, not out of defeat, but out of love for your own sanity? What would happen if, just once, you allowed reality to be enough? Buddha's brutal answer wasn't brutal because it was cruel, it was brutal because it demanded honesty. It asked us to face the root of our suffering instead of masking it. It asked us to stop blaming the world and start watching the mind. And in that watching, in that deep, radical awareness, the fire of desire begins to lose its grip. What remains is not emptiness, it's spaciousness. It's freedom. It's the quiet joy of no longer needing the moment to be anything other than what it is. And that is liberation. Now, take a breath. Look around. Feel this moment without wanting to change it. This is the beginning of the end of suffering. If this struck something deep in you, share this with someone you love. Because maybe they're burning in the same fire, and maybe, just maybe, they're ready to be free too.